This is 94.3 Radio 1, One World Your Station. You're with me, Erica, on Drive Mumbai. Very excited to bring on our next guest this evening. We're talking about the highly competitive world of high-performance sports, unlocking the human physical potential, engineering, elite athletes, all of that. Today, we're going to get a chance to discover all of that and more with Karishma Bulani. She's the founder of Humanics, the science of sport. Welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today.
So, this has been fine-tuned to a science, hasn't it, today? Physical fitness, designing the human body into this well-oiled machine with the potential to achieve incredible physical feats. Talk to us about the science of sports and sports science, the way you see it.
So fundamentally, you described it really beautifully, because the science of sport, it has been defined in many, many ways, but it is working in a way we basically are mechanics for an athlete, right? So athletes are really high value human beings because their body is working at peak. So prior to to sports science being an actual a subject that people did, you had coaches that were training individual sport, and you had the industry that came into play once the athlete was broken. So you had your physiotherapists and doctors and medical experts. So sports science came about as a way to kind of keep athletes at their peak without having them break. So it's basically involves everything that has anything to do with the human body and keeping it at its peak. So psychology, nutrition, how you fuel it, what kind of movement for what kind of result, how much do you train, how much do you rest so that the athlete doesn't break, so that doesn't start to break down physiologically and anatomically, so they don't get any injuries that need rehab, or they don't end up with type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and things like that because of their training program. So you need a knowledge of science to kind of prevent these things from happening.
Okay. So when did you discover then that this is your path? I mean, what was that defining moment? Was it like a sport or maybe an athlete, or what inspired you to take it up?
So I grew up in Mumbai now. And I was not athletic at all. I was the biggest nerd and always have been and still am. And I was always intrigued at how these people who are athletes, how are they so amazing and how are they so physically able in every which way. So it was my curiosity that eventually led me into sports science, but I didn't really do it consciously. It was a subconscious kind of fascination I had with athletes. But I went to Australia to study, and I had done neuroscience and psychology as my first degree. And I absolutely loved it. It was really beautiful, very, very interesting. After which I had the option to become a clinical psychologist, psychiatrist, or get into medicine. Because those were the kind of pathways post that degree then. So I did internships for a while. I worked at CEFI, kind of understood what it feels like to be a clinical specialist. And as interested as I was in it, I just didn't find that I wanted to spend my life healing a problem that was unsolvable. So I watched a doctor in neurosurgery, and we were there all night. It was about a 16-hour surgery, and I was just observing. And we still happened to lose that patient that day. And I think it was that day that I decided that it's too much for me to work in a situation where the human body is broken beyond repair. That just comes at the end stage. So I wanted to work with human ability when it was kind of healthy and keeping it at its peak. At that time, I didn't know that that's what sports science was, but I went back to study. I did anatomy, I did physiology again, I did some other courses, and I found my way into sports science eventually.
Okay, very interesting. So coming to today, bringing it to today, what is the big story then in sports science today? What is that headlining story in sports science?
So right now, when I came back to India, the thing is, I haven't been doing so much work with sport as I am with every other human being, applying that sports science in the world of health and wellness.
Okay.
So I'm right now working more so with individuals at homes, working with gyms, working with people who kind of want access to this knowledge, but it's too far removed from day-to-day life.
Yeah.
So although I have done some projects in the world of sport, this is kind of where I'm finding my expertise is really needed in this health and fitness industry that wants that knowledge, but doesn't know how to really translate the science into real life. So that's where I've been working now. So that's my knowledge base is there. And a lot of the work I'm doing now, ironically, is with diabetics and cancer patients even. Because the odd story of that is I got into this wanting to work with the elite.
Yep.
If you actually work with athletes, the shocking thing that I found over my time is that they aren't actually that healthy. In fact, the way we train our athletes and the way athletes train, it's very, very detrimental to the human body because it's not natural to push the body to those points. So if the science is slightly off, like sports science is a new field.
Right.
But what happens is when the science is off, so for example, athletes were training and having a lot of carbohydrates as their recovery meals for many, many years.
Right.
And over time, and the science at that time felt that that was the right thing to do. And, they're athletes and they're training, they need to refuel. But what we found now as sports scientists, when we look back, we realize that regardless of how much they were training, that's still leading athletes to type 2 diabetes.
Oh, okay.
Regardless of being in the athletic field. So we found a lot of athletes that had type 2 diabetes, that had issues physiologically that were the same as the patients in the hospital. So the knowledge from sports science has taught me that there's a lot more to it than just training. And that understanding of food and its impact on health is I'm applying that knowledge in different settings right now as well.
Okay. Well, that's fantastic. So coming to you and your connect with Australia, you having sort of lived there and studied there and all of that, what have you drawn from those experiences and how has it, helped you positively in your career choice today?
Definitely the best years of my life, the best 10 years of my life. And I went there mostly to get away from Bombay, as we all do in the beginning when you go and study. But I was very, very curious and very intrigued. So I just wanted to keep learning. And I think the knowledge that I got in Australia, it was just so beautifully taught, because I think the one thing I learned the most, studying 10 years of science, because it was a place like Australia, I found it to be so non-rigid. Nothing was set in stone. It was so fluid. So a lot of the information was presented to us by even Nobel Prize winners in our field. And it was presented to you in such a way that it's like, look, here is the science. This is not the one golden truth. The science changes, and this is what it is. And this is how you play around with information. And that is what I found so beautiful, because that's what's helping me the most today, because the world we live in is changing every day. The science is changing every day. So I set up Humanics to kind of respond to that, to make sure that we always have the newest science, and how do we apply it to affect the individual, a business, or anyone, an athlete or a coach, immediately from the fresh science. We don't rely on science that's 10 years old and formal education kind of courses of science.
Okay.
So Australia gave me the courage and the confidence to be able to think that way.
Okay. Okay. Well, bring it to the present, and here we are in a COVID-19 situation, being locked down for 9 weeks. What is it doing to our bodies? Can you shed some light on that scientifically? What is it doing to our bodies?
Oh, that's a great question, because I think there's three ways, there's three things that it's affecting in the body: the mind, your movement, and nutrition. So if I break it down to these three parts, nutrition is the one part where it's actually helping us for the first time, because we're all at home, right? And when you're home, you have a better relationship with your kitchen. And I found everyone making their own food, understanding what goes into it.
Yes.
So actually, I feel like we're way better off than we've ever been, because for 9 weeks, like, can you think of a time for 9 weeks when you've not eaten out, not really ordered in, not had too much junk food, and you're just having home cooked food? So whatever you're cooking, even if it is slightly junky and it is slightly carby, and you still know what's going into it. Right. So that way, I think we're going to see that trend. I hope that continues. Nutritionally, I think we're doing better than we were. The scariest and most dangerous thing is the fact that we're not moving. So yes, a lot of us are working out at home. We're doing, yoga, and we're finding ways to get movement at home. But it is absolutely detrimental to the human body to not have it move. You don't need to work out, particularly that 1 hour of workout is not going to actually change your physiology, but just movement and blood flow. And that is something that I think is really, really dangerous. And really interestingly, so currently a lot of the COVID cases and a lot of the really serious cases are linked to poor metabolic health. Poor metabolic health would be again type 2 diabetics, people with high blood pressure. And these are, so when you're type 2 diabetic and you have high blood pressure and things like that, once you're classified, it means something in your body has snapped. Right. Some system has and that's when you've been classified. But what we don't know is that about 80 to 90% of us have some metabolic condition that's underlying. We're building towards snapping,
Okay.
pre-diabetic, or there's some sugar imbalance or something. And that on top of not having movement, I think puts you at a much higher risk, because it just stops your immunity from being able to do what it needs to do to protect you. So I know on the one hand, we're trying to stay home to stop the spread of the virus, but eventually we need to worry about the host of the virus, which is our own human body. And what we're doing to worry about the host is the opposite of what we should be doing. I feel that we should be able to move a lot more. I think there should be, ways for the city to allow us to open up, just move around, go for walks,
Yes.
follow social distancing measures. But we need that fresh air and we need that movement, because without that, our immune system is not working. So in the event that you do catch a virus or you do catch something, your internal defense that's there to protect you, once you do get these viruses, we're just stopping that from working as well.
Okay.
So it's a bit of a catch-22.
Right. Okay. So try and get in as many steps per day as you possibly can. Yeah. So still with the COVID-19 situation, how has that affected your industry? How have you adapted and reinvented yourself and your business strategies, to cope with the times?
So I think I was really lucky because I've started a very small boutique business that was anyways very able to pivot, because I look at education, I look at research. I had many projects in the pipeline. So some were in sport, some were in health, some were in nutrition, some more clinical. So it's just shifted the kind of projects that are now starting, and the others have been put on hold for a while. Okay. So when you're working in a space, like I'm more in the space of education than I am in sport. So I'm lucky that way that education is never really going to be hit that badly, because you could switch and go online within a day. Right. It's not really different from how, and we had all the tools. So it was great. And now, in fact, it's better for me because I'm able to connect with people worldwide, where previously I was just blocking out all those resources because I couldn't meet them. So it's helped me personally a lot. And I also just feel that with the rest of the industry, I find in the health and fitness industry, things that have been impacted a lot are really large chains of, say, gyms or restaurants, or really large established businesses that rely a lot on brick and mortar, and also rely a lot on an old way of doing things, because they've started small and innovated, but then grown to a point where now they're so established that so much of it is more commercial than actual impact in a small, meaningful way. So I think that in the long run, even those businesses will survive, but it was about time for them to pivot. It was about time for them to reinvent. And the old ways of doing things, like if you think of any really large chain of gyms or fitness centers, it just became an old way of doing things because somebody had set a program, and then those programs were kind of, stepping down, and all across the globe, we were doing the same thing. I think if that had worked, we would all be a really healthy population. But there was some flaw in that model of having like standardized kind of health and fitness training across the globe. So I just feel that now is a really good time for everyone to just stop and think, which we get that opportunity to do now. This is what this lockdown has given the industry a chance to really redefine what works in health and how do we kind of cater to that.
Right. Well, taking back to your time in Australia, having spent a fair few years there, studying and living and what have you, what do you miss most about Australia?
I miss the outdoors. I miss being able to walk everywhere. And this is not just COVID time. This is ever since I moved back to India. It was just such a beautiful space to live and study, and so incredibly beautiful. With mountains, we were on the beach, there were lakes, the air was just impeccably clean. And there was a culture of just being so independent there. Right. You could just survive. You could have such a great life by just being alone, going to coffee, working on your own, going to university. You could have such a great, fulfilling, independent life. And I miss that. I know India has its perks with the culture and the family and all of that. It's great. But I miss being able to just survive independently.
But Australia's just sports-loving nation. They're sports obsessives, actually. It's a nation of people who play hard. Their culture celebrates all the rituals and symbols of sport. There's cricket and swimming and hockey and Aussie rules and what have you. What can we learn from that as a nation? What can we learn from there?
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, because sports science there was So even like working in the sport industry there were so many people that were so well educated about health.
Yeah.
And health was not something that you had to educate in Australia. It was taken for granted because we had people like from the time they were born, their entire lives, sport was something that people really looked forward to. It wasn't a punishment.
Yeah.
Movement was not a punishment there. And I think
Sorry.
that's
Community
something
building. Yeah.
right. So I had like my friends in my class when I was in Australia. We were studying, and we used to be in. We would basically go out party at night, and the rest of and me being Indian would just wake up late and hungover and trying to figure myself out. My friends in Australia, the Australian versions of me, would be up at 7 and they would go for Tough Mudder, which was like this insanely competitive, like 5-hour race early in the morning, and that was what was fun.
Yeah.
So it was just the perception, and she was like, "No, but it's so much fun. Come with me." I was like, "Do you hate me? Like, I don't understand. It would make me run in the morning." But that was joy. And I think the fundamental difference, they didn't have to be in a gym to be fit. They were naturally so healthy because they really enjoyed sport. And sport, not just to compete on the national stage or on the global stage, sport was something you did just to have a great time.
Yeah.
So I had this other boy in my class as well who we were doing a sports science degree. And I remember he would cycle from the city to the university every morning. He would bike in about, I don't know, it would take him about 45 minutes to an hour to get there. We had our classes and we had practicals. In the practicals, it was always an Australian kid who would be the lab rat. And we're doing high performance testing here. So it's not easy at all. Like it's really high end.
Yeah.
So in university, we had a bunch of Australian students and then we had your international students. And it was always the Australian students that were the most active. So I had this boy in class who would ride to class every day, maybe an hour and a half bike ride from the city into university. We would start class in the morning and he would then we'd have labs, practicals, and these labs of ours were high performance testing for athletes. So it would mean you working out at peak. It takes you to the point where you just need to recover, you can't breathe anymore. There are VO2 max tests and really high end testing. These kids would just volunteer, like it was just the most fun thing in the world. And then we would go for break. At lunch break they'd be playing a sport. They wouldn't even be like eating or sitting down. They're just playing a sport, maybe footy or doing something or the other. After class, we'd have a project maybe where some people are doing fitness testing projects. The same people are just volunteering to be lab rats for that as well.
Right.
Then they're riding back home. Then they're going home and competing locally in some sport as well. So that was their day. So when that's your day and you play sport recreationally to be healthy rather than to compete, that I find a really beautiful way to be healthy, because here we've grown up in a world where we've come to hate movement and think of it as a punishment.
That's true. That is true. We really have to relearn how to think and how to, inculcate sport into our lives.
Yeah, and it's the best form of movement. You don't really need to be on a treadmill and be repetitively walking towards nowhere to be healthy. Like health is something that you have anyway. And health is a celebration of what your body can do. But it's not a punishment for food that you've eaten or something that you feel like you need to do to lose a few pounds. And because we think that way about it, it's very difficult for us as a population to be healthy. I think the fundamental difference between how Australians view sport is what makes them such a healthy population.
Okay. Well, bringing it to us here and now with so many apps and YouTube channels and, fitness information available, how does one ensure that we're getting the right advice for our body type and for our physiological makeup?
So that's a great question as well, because I just saw a rant about that online just before we started speaking, and someone was like, you've just got to listen to experts and you really have to, be careful about what information you receive. And having been a bit of an information snob my whole life as well, that would have been me some time ago.
Okay.
But now I'm at a point where I'm like, look, it's about human movement, okay? That is why we are exercising, is because our bodies need movement. Whatever movement rocks your boat, do it. You don't need to particularly lift super heavy weights at super high intensity. You don't need to be inside of a gym unless you like it. If you really enjoy it and that's the kind of movement your body really seeks out, that's great. So for me, I like yoga. I love yoga. And yoga can be very basic and very, very intense. So when
Right.
you go into Ashtanga and you can go into Bikram yoga. So I kind of vary my workouts that way. I feel like I'm doing something that I love. I wake up every day. I look forward to it. I used to do about 3 hours of yoga when we had access to the
Really?
studio.
Wow.
I just find that it works for me, so you'll do it more. But if you're so I think whatever experts, there are tons of people giving information out there, and I don't think anyone's really wrong. I think they're just catering to different people. So you need to kind of pick your person. Be like, this really works for me. I'm enjoying it. It's working for me. I'm not feeling like I'm forced to be in some military camp, and I'm going to pick this person. Just kind of pick what works for you.
Okay. Well, for the young ones who are now, in the near future, not so distant near future, I'm saying that they might want to go to Australia to study sports science out of Australian universities. What would your message be to them?
I think that would be the best decision they ever make, because Australia is, firstly, whatever you go there to study, it is such a beautiful place. I was there, my brother went there, and I spent 10 years there just studying and doing so much, gaining so much knowledge, but I just didn't want to leave that country and come back.
Okay.
And sports science as a degree. So when I came back to India, it was I think 2013, and from my knowledge, the first sports scientist here, because I could not find anyone else who had a sports science degree. I couldn't find anyone who knew what sports science was. So
Right.
for the first 2 to 3 years, I was just explaining to people what it is, until finally John Gloucester, who was working with who's at Coup Sports, and that team was really, they had like great understanding and insight into the world of sport.
Yep.
They kind of took me on board with them at Coup Sports, and that's the first people who recognize the need for sports science here officially, and we worked on a lot of projects together. So now I've started Humanics as a way to kind of bridge that gap and fill that need of what I didn't have. So when people go study sports science and come back here, I'm kind of and trying to set a platform for people to come back, and I can place them in different areas of sports science, because right now in India there's so much of a need, and whether you choose to work in sport, in health, in wellness, it doesn't matter which route you take. With the sports science degree, it's much more versatile than it sounds.
Right. And how have the connections and the networks and all the learnings from Australia, how has that helped you, set up Humanics and contributed to your process and to your success?
So I've always been in touch with a lot of alum from Australia. A lot of them we've just formed great friendships over time. I've been very in sync. When I was living in Delhi, we had the Australian Alumni Association. So through that, we spent a lot of time at the High Commission in Australia. Okay. So a lot of the programs, a lot of opportunities that were coming in from Australia, a lot of experts, we kind of had access to that throughout, which really helped me connect to the right people in the sports industry back here in India as well. So that I think was super helpful. And even just now, I connected with a friend of mine from Bond University. We were just studying there at the same time. And she's this amazing girl, and she's doing work in cancer and cancer research and taking care of cancer patients. So just last week, after I think 7 years later, we just connected based on the fact that we were studying in the same university. And now we're doing a project together with healthcare, cancer, and sports science. So,
okay.
I mean, these things come up, but just the fact that we were in Bond together was enough to, spark that work partnership.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, to my Radio 1 listener and those watching this, please write to the Australian Consulate if you're an alumnus, I should say, who wants to be part of the alumni and the network with innovative entrepreneurs like Karishma Bulani from Humanics. The address is events.australianconsulate@gmail.com. I'll say it again, events.australianconsulate@gmail.com. Great chatting with you, Karishma, and fingers crossed that we get out of this COVID-19 situation ASAP, and hopefully we'll get to connect on the other side.
Great. Thank you so much.